And by the way, that goes for any status change with any listing you have in the MLS. 24 hours is the rule on that to get that changed. And yes, that also means that if you represent the buyer, that you should have an expectation that the property that your buyers just put under agreement is reported as such within 24 hours. We'll talk a little bit during the anatomy of the buyer transaction, how you approach that if for some reason it's not done and why it's important. So finishing up those last couple of items on the anatomy of the seller transaction, after you reported the property is sold in the MLS, you're going to set up a plan for follow-up. The plan for follow-up. So let me answer that question in the chat. Did they change it? They actually changed it back in September. I don't believe that they changed it because of the market conditions. However, I expect that it will not retreat back up to 48 hours. I think 24 hours is here to stay. I think ultimately they changed it because they're looking to keep as tight of a control as possible with regards to accuracy, right? I think with 48 hours, they were still, with 48 hours combined with the pace of the market, they were getting a lot of complaints that people were headed out and showing properties that were already under agreement and not reported, but they still fell into that 48-hour period. So buyers agents were still wasting time. So they tightened it up to 24 hours just to maintain as accurate a picture in real time on the MLS as possible. And no, I do not think it will go back to 48 hours. I have been known to be wrong before. However, I don't think that's going to be one of those moments. So number 37, send a closing gift if it's part of your plan. You have to decide whether or not closing gifts make sense to you or not. I'll tell you that when I merged my business with Debbie's many years ago, I was not a closing gift guy and she was a closing gift agent. So we just kind of did rock, paper, scissors, and I decided it wasn't worth the conversation. If it was important to her and she had a plan and a system around it, I was happy to continue to just go on in that direction. So you just have to figure out what makes sense. If you're going to be a closing gift person, I would encourage you to do so strategically, right? Make sure that the closing gift isn't just a closing gift, right? Like 2 bottles of wine and some wine glasses in the fridge for buyers, or a bottle of wine at closing for the sellers. I'm not sure strategically that makes a whole lot of sense, because you open the wine, you drink it, or you give it away if you're a regifter, and there's nothing around to remind them of you, right? So do things that actually make good sense long term. Donna says Cutco. Yeah, if anyone's ever looked at Cutco, Cutco is advertising because you can put your branding right on the blade. And here's the thing, I think I have 4 or 5 different Cutco knives. You don't throw those away. And I use them all the time. I don't read what they say all the time, and yet I know who gave them to me without reading it, right? So stuff that will be memorable, things that are ultimately branded to you and remind people of you and what you do are more strategic gifts than just the gift card to Home Depot or whatnot. I strategically, for me as a business owner, I would want my closing gift to bring me referrals and pay me back over time, not just say thank you to my clients. So the follow-up plan, if you look at 36, 38, and 38A, which isn't on your screen. So 36 is follow up with the client within 24 hours, 38, 1 week, and 38A, which you can write in there, is 30 days. I think the proper follow-up plan for anybody post-closing is 24 hours, 1 week, 30 days. So if you close on a Tuesday, you're calling them on Wednesday just to make sure. Hey, just wanted to make sure everything got finalized yesterday, no issues. Just wanted to make sure that you got moved out okay. Just wanted to make sure, you know, you've landed in your new city or whatnot, right? So an immediate check-in goes a long way. And then of course a week later, it's just another opportunity for you to be in front of them. Don't forget, even sellers who move away still lived locally for at least a period of time, which means they probably know somebody. So staying top of mind, I find that sometimes agents with sellers who move out of town kind of just drop them. I think that's a mistake. I think there's an opportunity there for a continued relationship. I don't know about you, but a lot of my sellers who moved away, a lot of them came back, right? So I want to make sure that when they come back, they're coming back to me, and they left family or friends here, and can always pass that referral. And then, of course, you're going to place that seller on a post-close follow-up system, otherwise known as the 36 Touch program that we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago, right? So your 36 Touch program is ongoing, and as you have clients close, they just get moved into that group, right? It's as simple as moving them inside of Command, a different tag, and setting them up on that system, and then bam, they're just part of that 36 Touch system, so that you don't have to necessarily worry about how you're following up over time. Your 36 Touch program, including your 4 calls a year to them, will take care of that. Either automated stuff or reminders that it's time for a phone call. I would also not be shy about asking for referrals. One of the things that we oftentimes neglect to talk about as a source of business are referrals from current clients. And it's funny to me, because I have a lot of people say to me, well, I'm not sure I have a comfort level asking a current client if they know anyone who is looking to buy or sell or create wealth by investing in real estate. And I thought, well, like, why not? That's when people know other people who are doing it, because it's top of mind to them, right? When they're in the middle of buying, selling, or investing in real estate, they're thinking about other people, or they're coming into contact with other people who are doing the same things. And they have a heightened awareness around that. So it's a good time to be asking. So make sure that you're asking your current clients, both buyers and sellers. Certainly after a closing, it's a great time for a review or a testimonial, right? That's also not in here, but you should probably add at the end there. Get the review. We've talked in the last couple of weeks, not necessarily here, however, on our 9 o'clock calls and mastermind sessions, it's probably time to stop feeding the Zillow review monster. It's probably time to pivot away from that and start pushing reviews someplace else. Google reviews is where a lot of your colleagues have chosen to have things reside. You could certainly go elsewhere if you chose. But in that day or two following the closing, that's when you get that. That's when you get to make sure that review is taken care of. As you grow, you'll want a system around that, right? You want to make sure that there's some sort of systematic something or other that says, the day of the closing or the day after the closing, the email goes out with a link to a form that they can fill out to send a review, or the email goes out saying, please hit reply and tell me what you loved about me, or tell me what you loved about our transaction together. It's how you collect testimonials. It's how you get reviews. If you're pushing people to a specific site for reviews, you'll have to give them some actual instructions, right? Because they won't necessarily know what to do. So be as specific as you need to be to make sure that they are doing the things that you look for them to do. Any questions, comments, concerns on reviews? Ashley asked, does anyone use mytestimonialengine.com? Anyone on that?
I don't use it, just to be clear. Somebody, and I might have the wrong site, but so my Tom Ferry coach had recommended that a lot of people were moving away from, the Zillow reviews into Google reviews, and then also using this like testimonial that would push it out to your Google business page and to other, your other social media sites. And you
Interesting.
can also review it ahead of time. So if something came in and wasn't a 5-star review, you get the choice to post or not.
Mm, got it.
I've
Yeah,
never.
so that's something we'll have to look into. I don't know. Make sure, Ashley, the next time, I think our next round of masterminds for February are post-family reunion, the week after family reunion. So that's a great question for an additional room full of people. If we don't have anyone who uses it here, we may have someone who uses it in one of those other rooms. So be certain to bring that back to the
Yeah,
table. I'll jot it down as well.
I'll try to get more information on what the exact site and how it works. It was something that I was kind of tasked to look into. I use Google, and I've been promoting my Google along with Zillow, but more importantly, getting the Google reviews. So I'll let you guys know.
Yeah, love that. And one last thing. Let's go ahead, Donna.
So I just wanted to share one little thing about asking for the referral from current current clients while you're right in the why am I having so much trouble talking? While we're right in the transaction.
Yes.
And it started off as something that just happened accidentally, like I was being funny, and yet now it is absolutely part of every response. As we're going through it, your customers like to say, "Oh my gosh, you're so great. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I so appreciate that." Every time they do that, your first response, you think you're supposed to say thank you, which you are. And yet I've started saying, yeah, tell all your friends in a joking sort of way. And they laugh. But every time they say, oh, you're so great. Oh, this was great. Oh, thank you. I say, yeah, I tell all your friends to the point where they start to actually laugh. And when I say it, right as they're giving me a compliment, they say, yeah, I know, I'm telling my friends. And then they'll say something like, my brother needs, I was talking to, and I planted it like in their brain in this funny sort of joking. And yet I'm quite serious. If you think I'm that amazing, please tell everybody you know. And
Right.
it's just become so easy.
It's kind of like Jedi mind tricks, right? For those of you who are Star Wars fans,
Right.
right? Because that's what it is.
Yeah.
These are not the droids you're looking for. And so when you flip that around to say, hey, tell all your friends how wonderful I am,
Yeah.
they just go and do it. They just go and do it. And here's the thing, the reason that asking for referrals from current clients is so crazy important is that much as we all like to think that our clients kind of think about us all the time post transaction, that is not really what happens, right? You are in their lives for that intense 60 or 90-day period of time, and then your follow-up plans will create some loyalty, and yet they don't wake up thinking about, gee, I wonder what my realtor is doing, today. Doesn't happen. I can tell you a quick story that I had one time where I had clients who did love me, and their child, who was probably 5 or 6 at the time, loved me more than I think my mother did, right? Because every time I would go, it was about Rick, and every day in school, they had like a career day in school, and the kid's father went in to talk about what he did. He was like some analyst or something like that. And Jonathan, which is the little boy's name, said afterwards, after his father got finished speaking, the teacher said, to Jonathan, thank you so much for your dad for coming in and talking about what he did. And Jonathan said to the classroom full of students and parents, well, yeah, that was great, but I really wish we could have had our realtor Rick come in and tell us what he did. I mean, I was like like a superhero to this kid. I don't know why, to tell you the truth. It's the only time in my entire career that has happened. And I will tell you that about 3 or 4 years later, it had all worn off because I was invited to dinner as they were putting their house back on the market. And I got there, Jonathan, how you doing? And he was like, kind of like, who are you? Why are you important? So it was short-lived. And yet, other than Jonathan, don't expect lots of top of mindness from your clients after the closing happens, after the transaction. So the very best time to be asking them to either be talking about you or to be referring you is when they're in the middle of their experience with you, right? Don't forget about that. All right, so there is the anatomy of a seller transaction. Questions, comments, concerns? Nope. All right, so take out this form. That looks like that. It says pricing strategies on it. Like I emailed to you earlier today. I wanted to just take a half a step backwards because you did not have this document earlier this week when we were talking about pricing, objection handling, and positioning. I think this is one of the strongest tools, one of the most powerful tools that exists as a listing agent. And it's powerful when you're listing property, if you have to objection handle. It's powerful if you choose to list a property a little higher than you'd like, such that you can have a conversation around how we're going to move forward, right? You use this document. And it's kind of the tool if you've taken a listing and 21 days later it hasn't sold and you're having that seller strategy session, right? That follow-up. A couple of you seemed a little surprised. I did say 21 days. How long does it take a house to sell?
Depends how it's priced.
So yeah, that kind of is the answer. And the reality is properties that are priced correctly right now sell in like all of a hot minute. And yet, even in a more normalized market, properties that are priced properly, they don't take more than 7 to 14 days to find a buyer. That's how you know whether or not they're priced well or not. So 21 days, that's, for me, that's the maximum amount of time that we're going to allow a property to sit on the market at a specific price with no one purchasing it. So at the listing consultation, we simply have an agreement that we will meet every 21 days, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. We'll have you come in, we'll review where we've been in the previous 3 weeks and where we're going in the next 3 weeks. That's how I described those seller strategy sessions. But the reality was, if the house hadn't found its buyer in 21 days, the market rejected its positioning. And that is a truth. Every once in a long while, I will concede that perhaps if you're working only in the high end, that maybe it's not 21 days, maybe it's 30. I'll give it an extra week in the high end. But again, after 30 days in the high end, you know, the market has spoken. And here's one of the things I want you to understand about why that's a truth. What happens when a property comes on the market? There's all these people who have been waiting for new inventory, right? And so there's a flutter of activity because the people who have been waiting for something new to come on are all just kind of circling around, and then boom, they descend upon that property. And if none of them choose to make an offer on that, that all happens in the first 7 days, generally speaking. If none of them choose to make an offer on that, what happens to the house now? Now who's the house waiting for? That is correct. New buyers to the market, right? It's the onesies, twosies who just happen to be new to the market. There is no mad rush. There is no pent-up demand. All of the pent-up demand people who are willing to pay top dollar for a house because they've been waiting to say yes, they came and saw the house and didn't purchase it. Do you see how that works? So there's either something really interesting on television or no one's agreeing with me. Do you disagree with that? Or do you agree with that assessment of how traffic works at a house?
Totally agree.
Sir, yes, sir.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Jay. If you could address me that way from here on out, that would be awesome. And if you could just teach your colleagues the same. Sir, yes, sir would be brilliant. Now it makes me feel like we're in the Army, right? So that is the path. And I tell you that because there are times where you're going to have to explain that to your seller clients. Because I understand it and you understand it, and oftentimes they don't understand it. They think the path to finding that buyer is time. And what we know is the path to finding a lower sale price is time. Right? All right. Guys are killing me today. I think we're going to stop and do calisthenics for just 2 or 3 minutes to get your blood pumping. Then we'll sit down and continue our conversation. Donna says, no, I just did my hair. Please don't make me sweat. As soon as I said that, you touched your hair. So that's why I went there. So, all right. So selling strategies. Well, let's just kind of pop back to that conversation real quick. Do you have it in front of you? Do you see what it says? Do you see how awesome it really is? So Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's the document. Here's the strategy that we will use to help you assess how the market is responding to your choice of positioning. Please note, there's always a way to know that your property is priced well. Based on this document that I've just placed in front of you, what is it that you see that would tell us the property was priced properly? Yes, offers. Do your mute buttons not work or unmute buttons not work? Is that the problem? Maybe I have a setting wrong or something. I don't know. I've not known this group to be so silent. This has always been a very chatty group, so it's just a shock to me. I'll adjust. It's okay.
The Zooms have been all day long today, Rick.
Say it again.
The Zooms have been all day long today.
I still didn't catch it.
I said the Zooms have been all day today, like from 9 a.m. till now.
Got it. Yes, I get it. For me too.
The other thing though, Rick, is that this is one of those scripts that we touch on that a lot of people are not aware of, that, you know, so this is another one of those secret weapons that when we use it, you see how powerful it is. And yet you have the concept, but now you have a form that actually lays it out. It's so powerful.
Yeah, a form and a formula, right? That's what I love about this, right? As a math geek, I love the fact that it's actually a document and it's just got a simple formula. Right? Somebody told the story the other day. I can't remember who it was. Oh, that's terrible. It might have been Sky, who I'm not sure is with us tonight, about working with her parents, right? And I said that I might spare you the story about me selling my grandmother's house. I was wrong. I will not spare you that story. I will give you that story simply because it illustrates what Donna just said, and it also kind of walks you through how you can utilize this document should the house not sell in that first 2 or 3 week period of time, right? And so my grandparents, 4 or 5 years ago, decided to sell the house that that my mother grew up in and downsize as they were approaching 90. It just seemed like a good time, and so I hired a KW agent on Long Island to represent their property. And when we sat and had the pricing conversation, I was there with my grandparents and kind of sat quietly. Well, that's not really all that true. I think you can probably tell that that's not something I'm terribly good at. And yet I sat as quietly as I possibly could and allowed her to do her thing and asked my questions here and there and tried to guide everyone to making a good decision. And we ended up at a price, I think, of $580 or so for their particular property. Okay, great. So 3 weeks later, 21 days, I called the listing agent and said, okay, it's been 21 days and the property's still not sold. There have been, way more showings than we need to understand what the market's doing, and there hasn't been interest. Well, no, that's not true, she said. And I said, well, what part's not true? It has definitely been 21 days, and we've definitely had, X amount of 20 showings. She said, well, no, but there has been interest. I said, well, okay, well, talk to me about how you define interest. And she said, well, I define interest as, positive feedback. I said, all right, well, that's where you and I maybe have a different thought process. I define interest as a written offer, and we have had no offers. And so I think we need to bring the price down. And she looked at me and thought, oh my goodness, really? How can we possibly? I think it's way too early. I think you'd be selling yourself short. I think you should hold on for another buyer. So here's lesson number 1. When the client calls and says, I want to sell this house faster, I think we need to adjust the price. There is no reason to argue that, because if it's been 14 to 21 days, frankly, if it's been 6.5 hours, well, that might be a little short. But if it's had some market time and the seller themselves decide, I want to make this move faster, you have a conversation around what might be able to get that job done. That doesn't mean undersell the property. That's not what I mean when I say that. Please don't hear it that way. What it means is asking some additional questions. Has your motivation changed? Do we need to approach this from a different strategy? What strategy were you thinking would make sense, right? Those are all questions you get to ask. But in this case, I was sort of the client saying, I think we need to bring the price down. And so she pushed me off for another week, and I allowed that to occur. And then we all had a meeting, right? So we all have a meeting. My grandparents are there. The agent I had hired was there, and we started having this conversation. And all along, my grandmother, who is a no nonsense, like let's get it done, don't blow smoke anywhere near me. Just tell me the truth and tell me the facts, and let's just get it done. All of a sudden started to behave like sellers behave, right? And so one of the things I want you to recognize is that sellers behave a certain way. Even sellers who behave a different way, right? At that point in time, I had known my grandmother for 47 or so years, right? 46 years. And I had known her to behave a certain way. And as soon as we started to talk about the price reduction for her largest asset, she started to behave differently. That's just a behavior thing. It doesn't make her wrong. It doesn't make her a bad person. It's just how sellers behave, right? So I want you to understand that, because that was a massive aha for me as a listing agent, when I finally recognized that sellers didn't behave that way to me. They didn't behave that way this time. That's just how sellers behave. And so when you understand how sellers behave and the questions sellers ask, you're prepared then to simply have a different conversation. And so my grandmother started to say things like, well, I don't know if it's been on the market long enough. I don't, we're not giving this house away. This is what's going to, they didn't owe anything on the property. So it was all equity for them. This is what's going to, feed our nest egg in a big way for the remainder of our natural lives. And here's one thing she didn't say, because my grandmother, since I was little, I can always remember her saying, nobody should plan on getting rich after I die, because I'm spending it while I'm alive. I'm not saving it for all of you. I'll help you if you need help with my money while I'm alive, but don't expect a big windfall when I'm dead, because I'm spending it while I'm alive. And she has pretty much done very much that. And so we sat down and had this conversation, and I could see that the conversation was going through all these weird seller motions. And so I interjected and said to the agent, I'm curious, could we maybe look at this document, this seller strategies document, which I just happened to have because I knew we'd need it, right? So out it comes, and I could see that she hadn't used it as much as I had. And so to rescue her, I said, would you mind if I just kind of asked a couple of questions? And so I got into the mode of, this is how we address sellers who are struggling with a price reduction. Had no bearing on the fact that it was my grandparents. And so I said, okay, Graham, so here's the deal. If you take a look at this document will diagnose the issue your property has as it relates to the marketplace. And so when you look at these 4 categories, which category best describes what your home has experienced? And then I shut my mouth. And she looked at it and she said, well, I guess category 2. And I said, I would agree. I asked the agent across the table for me, would you agree as well? We have had showings and no offers. We haven't had low showings. We'd actually had pretty high showings. And we weren't experiencing no showings, which is that drive-by. So yes, showings and no offers. I said, excellent. The other benefit to this document is that not only will it help you diagnose the issue that your house may have as it relates to the marketplace, it also gives you the cure. And so I'm curious, in category 2, what is the cure that's listed there? And it was at that moment she looked up at me and she said, Richard. She's the only person on the planet who still calls me Richard. I know what you're doing, she said. And I said, excellent, then we can shortcut the process. So if you know where we're headed, you know that the diagnosis is what? And she said, well, it says we're off by between 4 to 6%. I said, agreed. And so the only question that remains is, what kind of an adjustment would you like to make? And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you have a choice. We can either make a 4%, a 5%, or a 6% adjustment. Which of those 3 would you prefer? And she chose one, and we did the math, and we rounded it to the next 9. I think we reduced it down to like 460, 565 or 569, something like that. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. We were done. And oh, by the way, in the next 7 days, she had 2 full price offers. Just by the way. So understand that using this form, you just walk people through it. This is not you saying, I think we have to reduce the price. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've said that in years. Years. Instead, you just bring tools to the table and you ask them what the tools are telling them. What's the strategy? And remember, we talked about sometimes you have to play the what if game, right? Let's assume, let's do the what if that we were just making a decision based on this documentation. And then once they give you that answer, you might have to ask the follow-up question, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to follow the the outline that's listed here? Are you willing to go and actually put the cure into play? See how you use it? See how it works? It's a great tool, guys. It's a great, great tool. I will tell you that once this tool came into my life, I never had a different conversation. It was always about, here's the diagnoses, pick a category, right? I'm not picking the category, they're picking the category. And the brilliance of this is once they pick the category, the cure is right there. It's all just in black and white. So if you're really in the low showings category, you're off by 6 to 12%. I'm curious, what end of that range do you think you want to adjust by? 6, 8, 10, or 12? Want to go high end? Or you want to go low end? Or should we have a conversation around strategically which might benefit you more, depending on what you're attempting to accomplish? Yes, ma'am, Elena.
Who created this form? Like, it's based on what kind of data, and how credible is the form? I'm your seller, asking you that.
It's very credible. It's based on national statistics. Please don't say it's based on NAR statistics, right? Because I didn't say that. Oftentimes what comes back to me is, where's the proof that this is NAR statistics? These are based on national statistics. And where the form comes from was, I think ultimately it came from Ben Kinney out in Washington State, who had done a mastermind group with top listing agents across the country. So they're national statistics that, yes, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, are absolutely relevant locally. Does that help answer that question? Perfect.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So I'm just looking at it, and for someone who, let's just say this person is at number 3, so low showings, obviously they're between 6 to 12%, right? That's how much the price is off by.
Yes.
Now, I have an idea of how I would approach a conversation with someone to, at least reduce the price. But if that person reduces the price, let's just say by 6 to 12%, that person might end up at number 2, right? Which means they'll have more showing, but they still wouldn't receive an offer. So that simply means once you're at number 3, the best place to go is number 1. I mean, why would you stop at number 3? I mean, at number 2.
Yeah, so Donald makes a really good point, and so let's address it. And sometimes sellers are more receptive to the one jump, right? Let's jump ahead of where the market is to make sure that we don't have to do this again and burn more time. That doesn't always work, right? And sometimes we have to help sellers step things down. And so if what they do is they decide, yes, I'm in category number 3 and I'm willing to take a 6% price improvement, and the 6% doesn't get them the offers, well, you're still in that 3-week time category, right? So 3 more weeks goes by, you're having another meeting now, and now maybe the showings have increased. So when you're using this form again, they're now going back and saying, well, the good news is we've moved from 3 to 2, but we are not in category 1. Yes, I would agree. And so I'm curious, what do you think the next best step to move you to category 1 might be? Well, we're 4 to 6. Well, we still only want to reduce it by the 4%. Okay, great. Except now over the 2 meetings, they've reduced it by 10%, which is maybe where they needed to reduce all along, right? The only time that doesn't work, the 2-step process, is in a declining market where you actually have to jump ahead of the decline, right? We don't have that happening right now, and I don't foresee it happening in the near future, right? So sometimes it is a 2-step process. It's great if you can help people see that making it a 1-step gets the job done faster. And what we know is that here are just there are reasons these are put out as real estate truths, right? They're not just suggestions. Like your first offer is almost always your best offer. Time is not your friend. right? Sitting on the market longer doesn't make you more money. It doesn't put more money in your pocket. It actually takes more money out of your pocket because buyers now see you as old inventory and are far less interested in making an offer even close to the asking price. They're just going to negotiate you. Those are just real things that sellers sometimes need to be reminded of, right? And remember, we're not telling people anything. We're always asking questions. So the way that we tell them that information is by using some of the prefixes that I gave you, right? So Donna, would it surprise you to know X, Y, and Z, right? So it's not always about asking, because you can't always ask the seller a question and expect them to know the answer, right? There's some information that you have that they don't. So when you're sharing that information, the way you mask it in the question is just by softening it up front with, would it surprise you to know that most cases that we see has the first offer be the best offer? I would hate for you to fall into the trap of thinking that there's something better coming down the road. Would it surprise you to know that most times that second offer being better than the first does not materialize? I'm curious, what would that do? What would that potentially do to your bottom line if this was the best offer that you're going to see? I'm curious, are you interested in putting yourself in a position of being forced to take something lower later on because you've now run out of time? Just other questions. Yes, ma'am, Don.
And let's not forget, this is just a couple of weeks later than when we walk them through how we pick the list price. So we've already been training them and modeling behavior of how I'm going to bring you facts with information. In this case, we're actually giving them the answer, put it in front of you, and then I'm going to have you think about it. And rarely do they go from 3 to 2. They see where they don't want to go from no showings to a few showings, but nobody's making an offer. But the goal is to go from no showings to I have an offer that I'm accepting. Often you'll get back, I got to do that all at once. And then you can have the conversations around it. Well, do you want to do this in 2 steps, 1 step? Do you want to chase them? Then there's conversations, but we've taught them how to behave. We've modeled this behavior and we're just bringing it back in front of them. So it's not coming out of the blue. They know what to do.
Yeah, really, really good reminder, right? Really good reminder. which by the way, guys, is another reason why it's another reason why 3 weeks is 3 weeks is 3 weeks. Right? It still kind of baffles me why agents wait so long to have a conversation. Well, it doesn't baffle me that much. There's nervousness around having to go, and here's, so I'm gonna tell you the secret to life right now. Ready? If you will use the process that we put in front of you, which allows you to set all the expectations up front and then move through a pricing and positioning conversation that has them use the data to make a determination, going back 3 weeks and then set the expectation that 3 weeks we're going to have a meeting. If you'll do all those things, it's just the expectation. If you don't do any or all of those things, that's where you get stuck because you haven't planted all those seeds. You have nothing to sow because you didn't plant the seeds, right? So now all of a sudden you're thinking, oh man, you know what? I didn't set an appointment with them for 3 weeks out. So now I have to make a phone call. And when I make a phone call, they're going to ask, why do you want to see me? And I don't want to have to say that we're going to have a price reduction conversation. By the way, it's never called a price reduction conversation. It's called a seller strategy session. Because people are excited about seller strategy sessions, not so much about let's reduce the price, right? But do you see how that affects their behavior and yours? So when we say to you, use this process and help people understand what the process is, get their buy-in ahead of time, and then just follow your own process. That's why we say it. I'll tell you, I've been there. I've not used this process in my early days. And you get to 30 days and think, oh man, you know what? This guy's a loudmouth. I don't really want to have to make a phone call. I'm not sure exactly what to say. I gave him the number that he agreed to. So therefore, aren't I really calling and saying, sorry, I was wrong, right? These are all the things that go through our heads. Where if you'll pivot and utilize a process that removes you from those decisions and instead puts you in the powerful position of helping empower other people to make good decisions, there's no fear around having those conversations. If you'll set up the schedule ahead of time, there's no fear around just calling and reminding someone, right? So 5 days from now, we have that appointment. It's our first seller strategy session. I'm so excited to speak with you. Just confirming 7 o'clock in my office. We shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. Great, right? Then we review motivation. We go through any additional comps and we call out the selling strategies conversation and we're done, right? It's not a big drama, right? It's not a big drama. Questions, comments, concerns about that?
If there is no motivation from the seller or not enough motivation?
Yeah, so great question. I have an answer that nobody really likes to that question. And my answer is, don't take listings with unmotivated sellers. Right, and so people do out of scarcity, right? That's not a listing skills issue, that's a lead generation issue. We're kind of right back to that conversation. If you're taking listings from unmotivated sellers, you're not creating a pipeline of motivated sellers where you feel confident enough to say, yeah, you know what, this one sounds like I think I'm gonna allow someone else the fun of that one. Because those of you with experience as listing agents under your belt, I think would agree with me. There is nothing more infuriating than an unmotivated seller. And trust me, it's not just you that's infuriated, it's them, right? They're annoyed with you, you're annoyed with them, everyone's resentful. It's just, it never ends well because there's expectations that can never be met. Right? Do you know this phrase, conflict only arises from unmet expectations? If you don't, you should write that one down because I remind myself of that about 5 times a day. Conflict only arises from unmet expectations. And so if you're constantly setting up expectations that you can meet and exceed, guess what? You reduce and or eliminate the conflict in your world. Another word for conflict, drama. Because some of you are sitting thinking, well, a little conflict now and again, that can't be terrible. Think of it as drama. No one wants the drama. My goodness, I can't think of something that sucks more time and energy out of our worlds than drama, either our own or someone else's. Take a stand against drama. Drama-free zone. I'm gonna get you all t-shirts. Drama-free zone, right? So that's my answer, right? My answer is get better and better at your consulting skills such that you can really help the seller hone in on what that motivation is. Sometimes I find that agents are getting into business with unmotivated sellers because they haven't honed those skills. They haven't asked enough questions. They haven't gone deep enough. And so they don't know the answers to the motivation, right? How do I know that? Because sometimes I'm asked to step in and assist in a situation. And when I sit down with the sellers, the very first thing, by the way, if there's ever a time where you need help, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. I'm happy to either role play it with you and send you in, or if you've done that 3 times and everyone just keeps ending up, having an argument, and you want me to sit with your sellers, I'm happy to do that. I only have a couple of rules. Rule number 1, either they come here or we do it on Zoom. I don't go to their house. Number 2, you've got to trust me. And when I say you've got to trust me, that means I'm going to do it the way I know how to do it. And what I find is that sometimes when I sit down with your sellers, I'll go through a consultation up front, because I'll start by saying, you know, you and I don't really know each other very well. If it's all right with you, I'd like to take just a moment or two to understand why you're a seller right now. What's prompting you to put your home on the market? And then I'll ask a couple of motivation questions. And I can see almost immediately whether or not that seller has ever said those words before. And it's always a far more difficult conversation if the motivation is only now coming out, right? They've been on the market 4 months and no one's actually spoken about motivation. Why do we do that? We do it because sometimes we operate from a place of scarcity, not abundance. And so it feels like taking the listing is better than not taking the listing. And we're afraid that if we ask too many questions, we may find out that this particular potential seller isn't really a potential seller. And there are some of us who don't want to know that answer. They don't want to know that truth, right? Because there's nothing else in the pipeline. And so to feel like a real estate agent, we go ahead and we say yes to it because, hey, something is better than nothing, right? We've had that conversation 97 times in the last 4 weeks. Do you see how that's not such a great path? It only brings heartache. Does that answer that question?
I have another one.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm in Woodbury. I just pulled MLS quickly for the last year, the crazy one. So our average price, days on the market is 134 days. Does it mean
Yes.
we are all overpriced, or what does it even mean?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure I can answer it with only that data point, because remember, in the MLS, 134 days is when the listings that you've looked at for the last 12 months actually went to deposit. So it could be that they sold way faster, and locally agents are allowing lengthy times to get to the deposit. There are some areas that don't really go to deposit until it's just about ready to close. There are some areas or companies that teach that deposit should only happen when there's a non-contingent contract, so the days can get really stretched out, right? So it's hard for me to answer that question, Elena, without digging in and getting some more data to really see how quickly homes have been selling. And the other thing I'll say is, Woodbury is a more rural community, right? And so being just outside of Fairfield County may have the days on market tick up a little bit. Being outside of, and when I say being outside of Fairfield County, I mean that from the crush from New York, right? Because the reality is towns and cities closer to Manhattan saw more momentum from the last 6 to 9 months than those on the outskirts. The further north and the further east you go, that whole momentum thing slowed down. It touched those areas, but it didn't quite hit them as hard as things closer into Manhattan. That's sort of a reality in our state, right? The further north and the further east you go, things slow down, things tend to cost less. And so there may be some local adjustments that you have to make. Maybe if you and I sat down and could prove based on the actual data, on the numbers, that 30 days really should be when you have that conversation. I'm not saying 21 is 21, although I think I actually did say pretty much that. But the idea is you have to know if your local numbers really are different than what we're talking about, and you can prove it, then make an adjustment based on the local numbers. Does that help? Yeah. And at the same time, what I would encourage you to do is don't get too sucked into it's different here, right? Whether it be Woodbury versus someplace else, or you have a listing that's not a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath colonial, and so then you give it a pass because it's unique. I can't tell you how many times I hear that. Well, this is a very unique property. Okay, I think probably that's not true, right? It was unique enough to find comps, right? So it's not all that unique because you found some comparables. But the reality is be careful you're not making exceptions to give yourself a pass. When I say 21 days is 21 days is 21 days, what I mean is take a stand about having communication with your sellers based on their motivation. I don't think 21 days is an unreasonable period of time to have a seller strategy conversation. If something local drives you to say, let's have the conversation now and hold for another week or two and then implement, well, then that's a local decision, right, that you get to make. But take a hard and fast rule about when the seller strategy session actually occurs to keep people on a schedule, whether or not they're actually implementing some of the adjustments at that time. Hopefully that's helpful.
That's what I wanted to ask you, because I know you said there's a 3-week gap that you use. And obviously with the market that we're in right now, not necessarily may not need 3 weeks, but what happens in a market where there's a lot more inventory? Like, do you still use that 3 weeks, or do you use a longer time frame?
Yeah, so great question. For me, 3 weeks is 3 weeks is 3 weeks, right? And again, what I'm saying is my seller strategy sessions are 3 weeks apart. So I'm not going longer than 3 weeks to sit and have a conversation about what's occurred in the last 3 weeks and what's about to happen in the next 3 weeks. If something is driving a decision that we don't take action on an actual reduction, we're still having the conversation. And if something is driving, holding that decision to actually implement, we'll hold maybe for another week or two or whatever, right? But I'm still having the conversation on having that meeting every 3 weeks, because you're just setting up a policy and a system of communication so that everyone is, or else you get 60 days out and there's too much to go back over. There's too much has now happened. All the buyers have kind of shriveled up, and everyone's in a far more agitated spot because 2 whole months has gone by and they don't have an offer. I'd far rather sit with somebody 3 weeks in who still has a level of excitement about putting their house on the market and getting it sold, and utilize that emotion to help them make better decisions. Or else you get 60 days in and everyone's sitting there with their arms folded, being grumpy with each other, saying things like, well, I don't understand why you're not just advertising it more, right? But the reason that that's happening is because you've set those expectations to have those questions asked of you. And what I mean by that is, if you chose not to have the 3-week conversation, and you chose not to have a seller strategy like this one, the only place that the seller can think of to go is, well, you must not be doing your job, instead of having market-driven conversations, right? Hey, I have a question for you. Has anyone ever experienced a real estate agent
Yes.
who was terrible at what they did but sold a whole lot of homes?
Yes.
Right? Why is that?
Yes.
Right, that their pictures of their listings are terrible, right? They don't do the things that you think are important. Their bedside manner, their customer service is total crap, right? How they address other agents is frustrating at best, maybe insulting at worst. And yet they sell a whole lot of houses, because you know what they're good at? They're good at understanding what drives the market and helping their sellers make decisions based on that. Because that's the thing that creates results. Now, it's awesome when you can also be good at all those other things, because that's when you really have a big thriving business. But I know agents, I know sellers who choose some of those agents, and they say things like, yeah, you know what? He's a real jerk, but he sells a lot of houses, so we're just going to go with him. Results mean something, just by the way. Results mean something. All right, why are we talking about this? Okie dokie. Donna says she'd been on 2 homes in Woodbury in the last 3 weeks, which had multiple offers and contracts within 3 days because the agent waited for more offers to come in and went to view another property in Woodbury, which has been on the market for weeks. We didn't put an offer in on. The listing agent knows it's overpriced and has already failed to appraise once, but the owner will not reduce, right? So there you go. Call Elena, she probably knows them. She can maybe get you a different response. Right, because I think there's only like 17 people who actually live in Woodbury. Is that right? A little more.
And right now I have 2 clients that want to live in Woodbury.
There you go. All right, guys, any questions on the selling strategies? Any questions on the list side of the business? Any questions on anything we've covered? Nope. Okay, perfect. So let's do this. Let's kind of take 30 seconds and take a deep breath. We just went through a whole lot of stuff about the seller side. Now we're going to take a complete 180 and start talking about being the buyer's agent. What can you tell me about being a buyer's agent today? Come on, some of you are actually out in the field right now with buyers. What can you tell me about being a buyer's agent today?
You have to be very fast, very on point with everything. Make sure you understand everything your buyers want and find in that context what they might want to buy.
Yeah, so I like where you started, Eric, which is fast. That is definitely one of the things that you like. You cannot let any grass grow under any of these new properties, right? You need to be, and it's funny, Michaela says you need to be available at a moment's notice. That is absolutely true, but there's even a more important player that has to be available at a moment's notice. And that's where expectation setting comes in. Who else has to be available at a moment's notice, even if it's
The buyer.
inconvenient? Yeah, exactly right. Right. So are you training your buyers to say, hey, you know what? I'm certain that you understand exactly what's going on in the market. Let me just give you a couple of statistics to underscore that. Here's what some of that means. Would it surprise you that when a new property comes on the market, you and I both have to drop everything and meet there like within the first hour it's on the market? Well, I work. I understand. Me too. And yet I'm willing to drop what I'm doing to help you secure a home that you need to purchase. So I wondered how we could figure out a plan to allow you to do the same. Could you have a conversation with your boss that says, I am in the middle of attempting to buy a purchase a property. And as I'm sure you know, inventory is very, very scarce. And so would it be okay if I used my lunch hour over the course of the next couple of weeks in kind of a helter-skelter way? Right? So help them help themselves make those opportunities available to themselves. Because if you have people who say to you, I can only be up on the weekends, guys, they will never find a house. You might as well tell them to wait a year. Right? In the time it takes for them to get on the train from New York and get up here, the house already has 19 offers on it. That's not to be discouraged. I don't say that to be discouraging. I say that to just be real. And so you need to help them understand that time is of the essence. Here's another thing, another tip I can give you about being a buyer's agent today. Have really good relationships with listing agents. And what I mean by that is, even if you don't know them so well, I would be looking on the MLS and see who the powerful listing agents or the I can't think of the word. It's been a long weekend. It's only Thursday. the most productive listing agents out there. You need to know who they are. And if you have someone who's struggling to find a piece of property, if it were me during my lead generation time in the morning, I would call. If there's 10 or 20 of them in that town or that city, or those towns or cities, depending on what the buyer is looking for, I'd be on the phone with them. Hey, Ashley, it's Rick Scott. We don't know each other. However, I just wanted to call and introduce myself. I'm a really big fan of your business. It looks like you had a great year last year. Congratulations. The reason for my call today is I have really well qualified buyers who are looking to purchase between 7 and 850 in Fairfield. And it looks like that's kind of where you specialize. And so I just wondered, would you do me the small favor of, if you've got something coming on or something in your pocket, would you reach out to me? Because I'm telling you what, your sellers want these buyers. I'd have that conversation over and over and over again with the more prevalent listing agents in a certain town or city, so that they end up knowing who you are, and that they know. Now, don't call and say that if you don't actually have really well qualified buyers, right? But if some of you I know are struggling to find properties for your buyers. I had a conversation the other day that said, I said, okay, well, what strategy are you using to find properties for your buyers? And it was like I asked for the answer to be delivered in Greek. So, well, what do you mean? Like, I look at the MLS. Like, no, well, I get that. Like, what else are you doing? Well, what else is there? Okay, well, maybe we found part of the problem, right? What else is there? There's a long list of things that need to be done right now because the inventory is not readily available. You need to be finding inventory, staring at the MLS, hoping that something pops up for them. It is not the job that they have hired you to do. Right? The job is turning over every stone and making those phone calls I just mentioned, looking on sites that feature for sale by owner properties, and calling those for sale by owner properties to see if you can get them in there to show, or get in there yourself to see if you can preview to make sure that the property might work for them. Sending postcards and following up with a phone call to certain neighborhoods if they're looking for certain neighborhoods, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that you could be doing. And that's what being a buyer's agent looks like right now, today. It doesn't change all that much when the market slows down a little bit. And yet there are certain things that we're doing today that in a more normalized market aren't quite as necessary. Does that sound like a plan for those of you who are struggling to find inventory on some extra things that you might be able to do? Here's the other thing I would encourage. I would encourage you to continue to have active conversations with your buyers. And here's what that means. So I've shown Eric 3 weekends in a row, a house or two. He made offers on one of them each weekend and wasn't the winner. And part of the reason is because he was looking in the 6 to 650 range, and his max that he can spend is like 650. I don't think that's a winning combination right now. I think the conversation that Eric and I have to have is, look, knowing that properties are going to go 5 or 10% over, right? I think we might have said this once before. I'm just going to repeat it real quick. We may need to help Eric start looking for properties in the 575 to 6 range that meet his criteria, so that he's competitive enough to offer the extra $30,000 or $40,000 and still hit his max, but be one of the bigger players in that arena, instead of just one of the folks who's coming in at asking price, right? Or just a smidge over. So those are conversations that need to be had to see how the buyers feel around that. Be careful that you're not making judgment calls and not having those conversations thinking, well, these buyers are never going to want buy something a little less money. They want so much for the money as it is to move them down into a lower price range. How will that work? Well, how it might work is they actually might secure a property instead of getting frustrated and deciding not to buy in Fairfield County anyway, because everyone up here are liars, cheats, and steals because they can never seem to win. Anybody have those conversations going on with buyers? Because it's happening. They think somehow that we're doing this to them instead of attempting to do something for them, right? So really be cautious around that. Questions, comments, concerns about being a buyer's agent today? All righty. So as I said, we're going to start going through the anatomy of a buyer transaction, which again is a little bit backwards, but we are going to do that so that we can get to the end of the buyer transaction before we finish today. And then your homework will be reviewing the Mastering the Buyer consultation scripts so that when we come back on the 23rd, we will work through those scripts. That'll probably take us a session and a half or so, and then we will finish up. So we'll probably be finished on the 24th, just in case you're planning. So one more Tuesday, one more Wednesday, likely not that Thursday, and we will be all set. So the anatomy of a buyer transaction. We are now going to assume that we've already spoken about the consult, being hired, and going out and taking a property off the market. And so the second you find something, the buyers find something that makes sense to them, the very first thing you're going to do, so you're lead generating for appointments, you're getting appointments, you're consulting, you're having clients speak with a financing person to determine their ability. Hey, let's have that quick conversation. Anybody ever hear the phrase ready, willing, and able?
Yes.
So I want you to forget that phrase, because ready, willing, and able is not relevant today. What you need are able, ready, and willing buyers. You've got to take the ability and move it up. That's got to be the first thing you take a look at. Ability today and ability to perform strongly trumps anything else. And think about it. Imagine putting someone in the position of going to view property when they haven't spoken to a financing person. What are the pitfalls there?
You start looking at the properties they cannot afford, plus you lose your time, their time, and lots of other things.
Yeah, it's a total waste of everyone's time. And the worst thing that can happen is what Elena said first. They start looking at properties that they actually can't afford. And here's the big downer on that. Sometimes they find one and fall in love with a property that they can't afford. Then they find out that it's outside of their price range and they have to look down a level, but they're so stuck on what they loved that they don't want to look at things that are lower, right? And so that's a real tough mind shift to help people through. And they never should have been looking up in the 7s to begin with when they can really afford the 6s, right? And so let me just comment real quickly on what's going on in the chat. The simple answer is it depends on the program. It depends on the program that the buyer is being put into, right? There were some questions I think about length of time. So depending on the lender, depending on the bank, depending on the program, all those things. So it's going to be anywhere from 30 to 90 days, depending. It also depends on who's willing to pay for what. So that's going to be a more of a case-by-case scenario. Eric.
Thank you, Rick. So when you say, so I hear all this about buyers looking at properties who are beyond their thing as well. And, you know, my wife and I did the same thing when we were looking for a house back in February. we looked at houses, but actually before even visiting them, we downgraded ourselves because we know what our limits were from either a cash perspective or a financing perspective. So to me, that would be one of the first things you discuss with your potential buyers about what is your ability, what is your pre-approval limit, those kind of things. Even if it's a cash thing, how much are you willing to put on the table max?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And willing ability, right? And then willingness, right? So the ready and willing piece, a lot of agents tend to put that first because they have someone who raised their hand and says, I want to buy a house. Great, let's go out and look at property. Oh, that's a little quick, right? Are you able to purchase? What is the time frame? What are the parameters? So let's make sure that we're connecting them with trusted mortgage partners. I'll have one of our mortgage partners here when we return to speak with you about financing for about 20 minutes as well. So you can ask some questions there. Do know that we are in business with 3 separate mortgage partners: Westport Mortgage, Guaranteed Rate, and Loan Depot. The reason we're in business with those 3 is because those are the 3 that actually passed our vetting process. Right? It wasn't because somebody just happened to drive up and say, "Hey, you're looking for a mortgage partner," right? We put partners through a whole vetting process. They actually came and auditioned for us with a whole bunch of other folks. We narrowed it down, and then our ALCs, right? Your colleagues, our ALCs went and interviewed the finalists and helped us choose who would be our partners. So they're vetted very specifically based on what's important to each of you. So know from me that, and I use them personally, just by the way. I would never suggest that you use someone that I haven't actually used myself. So you find you find the property that's the one, and the very first thing you're going to do is kind of shoot back to the office and or take out your handy dandy app and start running comps as if you are the listing agent. Does that make sense? So you're running comps as if you are the listing agent. You're going to find the best 3 sold comps and present those to the buyer to be certain that they have the data they need to make a good decision. Because what's one of the first things a buyer will ask you once they find a property that makes the best sense for them?
Is it priced right?
It's in the price range.
Right? What kind of an offer should I make? What should my offer be? Well, of course, we know today, you know what it sounds, I think we have, I'm gonna push pause a second because I see we have some folks who are joining us and I have a feeling, Gail, would you do me a favor? Would you confirm for me that you are here for career night?
Yes, I am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So guys, my mistake, because we have a Zoom conflict suddenly. So we do have some folks who are joining us for your team leaders career night. I think that what the team leaders didn't realize was that we ran till 6, and so we've double booked. So here's what we're going to do. Since we didn't really start the anatomy of a buyer transaction anyway, I am going to ask you to read. I think it's a different meeting number. Okay. So before we finish this up, because I have someone else who I don't 100% recognize here. Let me just ask the team leaders, so nobody go anywhere. We have the technology, we can figure this out.
It is, according to the email, is this number.
Okay, I'm
550.
just gonna get confirmation from the team leaders. Just give me half a second. The good news is that for those of you who are here for the career night, at least for the next 7 or so minutes, you're going to get really great information about how to work with buyers. Okay, I do now have confirmation that we have a Zoom conflict. So I will take full responsibility for that. That is my fault. I did not confirm with them that we would be on until 6. So for those of you who are here for the career night, that will begin in just about 5 or so minutes. So those of you who are saying it's a different number, I will tell you that, well,
Yeah, I just double checked it. There's an email that was sent about 8 hours ago, and under the career night, it's the one that I put in the chat.
okay. So here's what I think happened. I think each of your team leaders used a different Zoom code to pass people to. So everyone hold on a second. I'm going to mute myself to figure this out, and nobody go anywhere. Hold on a second.